The Amazing Digital Circus contains a lot of biblical references, but none as apparent as the story of Cain and Abel, a short yet culturally impactful story about two brothers, jealousy, and murder. As early as the pilot, fans were able to deduce that the CNA logo featured throughout the show stood for Cain and Abel. We figured that if Cain, the AI, is named as such, it implies the existence of an Abel, another AI who Cain potentially killed out of jealousy. By episode 8, this is pretty clear. The opening scene shows us exactly that. But episode 8 actually tells us a lot more about the Cain and Abel story than what happened between the two AIs. It runs a lot deeper, even into the relationships within the company that developed them. Think of it this way. CNA is, of course, a real company. A company that predated Cain, the AI, a company that was named before the events in the opening sequence. Episode 8 makes it abundantly clear that there's another crucial Cain and Abel parallel in the story that we've all overlooked. Two humans outside the circus whose strained, jealous relationship caused this whole mess in the first place. Today, I'm going to talk about the tragic relationship between Scratch and Kinger, the two minds who work together to make all of this possible, and the devastating implications this has on the finale. Firstly, we need to go over the biblical Cain and Abel story to refresh our minds on the details. This will help us develop a little criteria we can use when we're looking out for parallels within the show. Cain and Abel were the first two sons of Adam and Eve, with Cain being the eldest and Abel the youngest. Our story starts with the brothers as established adults. Cain was a farmer who grew vegetables, and Abel was a shepherd. They both made sacrifices to God from their respective fields. The Bible implies that Abel's offerings were of higher quality. Quote, Abel brought of the firstlings of his flock their fat portions, versus Cain, who offered, quote, the fruit of the ground. God, of course, preferred Abel's sacrifices and didn't like Cain's. God noticed that Cain was upset and told him that if he makes better sacrifices, he will be accepted, and if he doesn't, he will fall victim to the temptation of sin. Instead of making any improvements, Cain lured Abel out to a field and killed him. Here's the criteria I'm looking for when making a Cain and Abel connection. A distinct duo or an otherwise brother dynamic. Each member of the duo creating similar but unique things, both having presented their creations to others, and one member of the duo being accepted for their creations and the other being rejected. Now, I'm certain a lot of this story immediately reminds you of our AI Cain. Let's start with the opening scene of episode 8, Cain's conception. The episode starts with a lingering shot of a red dot on a grid. Then, a collection of smaller colored dots appear to be fed to the larger red dot. Flashing circus-related images appear after the feeding, quickly contextualizing the scene as a visual representation of an AI, presumably Cain, in its development. The dot then rhythmically outputs a series of shapes in response to the data it's been fed, which we can interpret as its own creative output. After each new data feed, the AI appears more and more unstable, outputting shapes more and more bizarre and abstract, until a box appears around the AI and its output halts. The shot pans over to another AI, this time a blue dot being fed information in the same way and providing consistent, regular output. The camera pans back down to the first AI. By now, it's slamming itself against the walls, eventually breaking out of the box. The red AI then appeared to consume the blue AI in the same way it consumed data. The two colors flickered on screen for a moment, outputting irregular shapes in their struggle for dominance until the final color settled on red. The new, combined AI then calmly outputted a series of irregular shapes that took the form of a circus tent, which we can assume to be the creation of the circus itself. So how much of this meets our Cain and Abel criteria? A distinct duo or an otherwise brother dynamic? Yes. Two individual AI models running in the same plane made by the same people. Each member of the duo creating similar but separate things? Yes. Both of them were tasked with providing output from the data they had received. Both having presented their creations to others? Yes. As AI models created by humans, their job is to create something deemed useful or otherwise acceptable for the company. One member of the duo being accepted for their creations and the other being rejected. Yes, The red AI being in a box while the blue AI was continuing to generate output means that the blue AI's output was the only one being used, the only one favored. Yippee! Woohoo! Finally! We have the AI Abel we've been waiting to meet this whole time. But interestingly, the blue dot wasn't the only second half of a duo we were introduced to in the episode. Immediately after the opening scene, we jump to a shot of the very beginning of the circus. We see Scratch, a yellow dog in a red shirt, focused in the center of the frame. He appears upset, like he's trying to reason with Cain, who doesn't seem to be listening. At this point, all we know about Scratch is that he was the first abstraction. Later in the episode, as Kinger becomes more lucid, we learn that they were both programmers at a company called CNA before entering the circus. The duo developed Cain together. Cain was, presumably, the first ever generative AI created. As he continues lore dumping, we learn that Kinger appears to have received most of the credit for the creation, saying,
"He was one of my greatest achievements as a programmer,"
but refusing to accept that, stating he
got a few pointers from Scratch.
Kinger went on to describe him as a genius and an out-of-the-box thinker, who provided fantastic insight into the project. However, Kinger then says Scratch's ideas were sometimes quite difficult for the rest of CNA to decipher. Bizarre and abstract, either due to pure brilliance or the tumor in his head. Let's go over our Cain and Abel criteria again. A distinct duo or an otherwise brother dynamic? Yes. They worked for the same company and they worked together. Kinger seemed to really look up to Scratch too. Each member of the duo creating similar but separate things? Yes. Both working as developers but had very different kinds of ideas and unique approaches to the way they coded. Both having presented their creations to others? Yes. Kinger stated that Cain was used as groundwork for the rest of CNA to gain a better understanding of programming generative AI. One member of the duo being accepted for their creations and the other being rejected? Yes. Immediately after saying Cain served good groundwork for CNA, he specifically said that he can't say the same for Scratch, that his ideas were hard to follow, bizarre, and abstract. With how heavily the show reminds us of the Cain and Abel story, the dynamic between these two characters is something we can't ignore. There are implications of a competitive relationship, jealousy, and even murder. Is this something that already happened, or is it foreshadowing of what's to come? Before I get into that, I want to talk about what I find most interesting right now: how much Scratch also seems to have in common with AI Cain as well. Remember those key words used to describe Scratch? Bizarre, abstract, and out of the box. Interestingly, the opening sequence visually addressed these very traits as it showed us Cain's development. It told us that abstract can refer to disorganized, incomprehensible ideas that are dealt with using confinement. Notably, this is exactly how abstracted characters are handled in the circus. We were also told that out of the box means breaking free from that confinement. Scratch, as well as being a biblical Cain parallel, is also presented as an AI Cain parallel. So, the dynamic between AI Cain and AI Abel and the dynamic between Scratch and Kinger clearly mirror each other. But what does this mean? Well, even though Abel's story came to an end, the Bible goes on to explain Cain's fate. This can give us a few more clues about the implications of Scratch and Kinger's fate too. When God noticed that Abel was gone, Cain first tried to deny the murder. God, being God, obviously figured it out immediately. God cursed Cain, stating that the ground he tilled will no longer be viable and that he is now banished from the land he lived on. He was sentenced to a life of wandering. This upset Cain, who feared that, alone and vulnerable, he might be harmed or killed by another person. God then placed a protective mark on Cain, stating, "Whoever kills Cain will suffer a sevenfold vengeance." Cain set off and ended up settling in the land of Nod, a region east of Eden. The Bible states that Nod is physically away from the presence of the Lord. He later built a city in Nod named Enoch after his eldest son. Immediately, we see parallels between the land of Nod and the void, between Enoch and the circus, and the absence of God feeling similar to lacking communication with the outside world. Of course, this aligns perfectly with AI Cain's story, but what about Scratch and Kinger? Scratch didn't kill him, right? Or could this be foreshadowing of events that haven't occurred yet? Although we haven't heard much about Scratch specifically, The Amazing Digital Circus has presented enough information about him for us to understand the implications of his character. In a very careful and subtle way, the show has established all the motivation Scratch needs to have been the one who created the circus in the first place, and to have been blinded by his ego enough to eventually doom Kinger. Scratch was responsible for one of the largest advancements in programming history, but his contributions were dismissed as bizarre, and his co-worker was given most of the credit. Like the biblical Cain, he struggled to understand that he needed to tailor his offerings to meet the requirements of the recipient. But why should he believe he needs to? Cain, after all, grew the vegetables that fed the sheep, that fattened the lamb that God approved of. Kinger himself said that Scratch was working on something before they all woke up in the circus, but he couldn't recall what it was. I'm going to assume the thing he was working on was, in fact, the very thing that makes the circus possible at all. The tools to make it possible for a human mind to live in the digital world in real time. But given that Scratch had a brain tumor that began having a noticeable impact on his cognition, and the fact that the writers bothered to tell us this means either one of two things. One, that Scratch was seeking a San Junipero-style afterlife for himself, or 2, Scratch spent a fair bit of time with that dangerous-looking headset on. One day, Cain's prototype went rogue and swallowed an entire other AI the company was working on. Suddenly, the new Cain's output is ultra-powerful, more consistent, yet just as bizarre and abstract as before. Obviously, an AI like this is extremely dangerous, and CNA would have wanted it shut down. But it wasn't shut down. Who left this running? Could Scratch have seen himself in AI Cain and saved him? In my video titled, The Abstract Thinker Who Abstracted, I outline why I don't believe Scratch could have truly been lost to abstraction. You really think that Scratch, the abstract thinker, just plainly ceases to think while he's abstracted? You really think that the mind who fucking built an entire sentient being from code couldn't do that again? He built Cain from scratch. Then he built Jax from scratch. You see? Poetic. Perfect. 100% canon. I'm telling you. Scratch's mind file is at the very top of the list when Kinger opens up Cain's source code. Now, whether the case is Scratch reformed as Jax, or whether his mind just exists deep in the structure of the simulation, his presence lingers in the circus. Like the biblical Cain became the ruler of Enoch, Scratch may be the true ruler of the circus. Enoch was a city established away from the presence of God, meaning that its ruler would be a sort of false God stand-in. In episode 8, Kinger accidentally ran code that, in his words,
accidentally killed Cain.
Unfortunately, given the biblical story and foreshadowing in the show, this doesn't look good for Kinger's eventual fate in episode 9.
Holy shit.
Yeah, shit. As we established before, God stated that whoever kills Cain will suffer a 7-fold vengeance. Additionally, in episode 3, after Kinger shoots the creature chasing them, Baron Mildenhall's tape reveals that
the creature was actually one of God's angels.
What?
And anyone who brings harm to it will be dragged down into the cold, spiraling pits of hell where my soul resides.
The sad truth is, ultimately, Scratch has effectively killed Kinger by allowing a dangerous AI to run, eventually leaving Kinger no choice but to end Cain, sealing his fate. Scratch's pride, his ego, his inability to reflect on the quality of his communication with CNA, and his stubborn belief in the power of Cain despite the danger, got in the way, ultimately blinding him to the risk to the lives of the people around him. He took a once thriving company that could have advanced human civilization ahead by a quarter of a century, and turned it into nothing more than an abandoned building. The Amazing Digital Circus, foundationally, is a story about two brothers, jealousy and murder. The tragic relationship between Scratch and Kinger bled into the AI models they created, and who eventually trapped them, dooming them to relive the same mistakes over and over again. Like the biblical Cain, Scratch was blinded by jealousy and pride, leading him to make a fatal mistake that killed his brother and banished him to a land of eternal wandering. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye!